Welcome back, guys. I'm Moose.
One sec. And I'm Lennox.
We are
Unapologetic. Welcome back to another episode of Unapologetic. Today I am joined by my two good friends, Wansa and Moose.
What's up, man?
Yeah, glad we could be back for this one, guys. Today we have a big topic on our hands. So we're going to talk about just the role of the government. What's a biblical view of the government or the state, to be specific. And in light of that, we're also going to give an analysis and critique of socialism. So I really hope this will be helpful for everyone listening to this. But yeah, let's discuss this. I mean, here's the thing. I think if we recorded half of our conversations on this stuff, we probably have a book at this point.
Yeah, probably.
You know, but I'm really hoping this will be good. And just to kind of provide some context here, I think these are issues that haven't really been interrogated much in Africa. I think there's more dialogue in the Western world generally around these things. Here's the thing: I don't even think a lot of Africans even know what they actually believe. Yeah. You know, so you might hear them articulate rhetoric that's given to a specific political ideology, but not even realize what they're saying or that's what they're championing. And so I think this conversation, what I'm hoping it'll do is that it would shed light on that, but more than that people would actually appreciate a biblical view on this. I think once again, this is one of those topics where the Bible has kind of been relegated to perhaps only dealing with things like soteriology and perhaps ecclesiology. We don't always believe that the Bible has something to say about everything. Yeah. And even that idea that the Bible has something to say about everything, I think some people hear that and think, oh, the Bible has a little opinion on that thing. No, what we're claiming is that every single system that has been established in this world was created by God. And the Bible gives us very clear instruction on how various institutions should be governed. And so we're definitely arguing from a biblical perspective. And I really hope this will be helpful for a lot of people. So let's begin with this. Very simple, basic question. What is God's intention for the institution of the state?
You want to start us off?
You go ahead. Oh, don't be so modest, guys.
All right. Well, the simple answer we can find in Romans 13. The governing authorities have a very specific mandate. Yeah. And they have a very specific sphere, so to speak, of authority that God has given them. And so we take our cues from that. Specifically, what that is the governing authorities have a mandate to condone good and punish evil. That's the biblical framework that we're supposed to work with. Right. Now, obviously, that is a very... It can be viewed as a very general statement to very specific, very specific situations. How exactly does that work out? What does punishment actually look like? What does condoning good actually look like? And, that's sort of where you get very differing worldviews about that, even within the church. Sure. Where you shouldn't, but because we have principles and boundaries to work with. Yeah. And so our worldview is supposed to be one that's biblically based, but unfortunately, and I think this is for a lot of different reasons. Yeah. That idea has been distorted. Sure. Our culture has distorted it for because people want to serve their own interests. Yeah. Because people want to gain power. Yeah. And so we are more and more seeing a departure from any biblical standard towards what governing authorities are supposed to be.
Sure.
They've become, in some situations, God. They've replaced God Himself. They've become the moral standard for everything they're not supposed to be. But yeah, I suppose that's where I would start.
Okay.
Condone good and punish evil. That should be the framework that we use.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead, man.
I'm in complete agreement with what you've said. What we need to see is that God is the one who has created all these governing authorities,
Sure.
and He is the one who sets the boundaries and limits for them in terms of what they can and cannot do, which is really crucial in understanding. If we do not have the conversation about what can and cannot be done by individual bodies,
Right.
Then we end up in no man's land, where we always end up in front of a judge trying to figure out, where the line is.
Yeah.
And the way God is objective. God is objective. God defines everything. God knows that there is a difference between different entities and objects.
Yes.
God is the objective standard.
Yeah.
But the way we have begun to view government, or the way we as society, and I'm talking right around the world, particularly the Western world, is that the arbiter of objectivity is now the court system. And so we always have to go before the court system, before the government, to ask where is the line.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Almost as though by virtue of them having that post, right, they are the anointed and are able to tell you where the lines are, which I think that goes way beyond what government were supposed to be.
Yeah.
Laws are no longer objective.
Yeah.
If only one person or one group of people can determine where the line is, which is Ayn Rand is a really brilliant. Just brilliant. She lays it out just brilliantly about how objective laws should be objective, and you can tell that we have messed up our view of government because laws are no longer objective. And so government is supposed to be an authority, if you will. God has placed them in that position. They should condone good. They should punish evil, and basically maintain the peace to some extent within society, but not view themselves as the be-all and end-all. So I'm completely in agreement with that.
I think that's brilliant. Another passage that we could refer to is 1 Peter chapter 2. One common thread between 1 Peter 2 and Romans 13 is the emphasis to submit to authority. However, a lot of people kind of stop there because it does also describe exactly what it is we are submitting to. And so some people kind of stop at submit to authority, so it's just like, oh, okay, so whatever they say, we should do. But it's very clear in these passages that there's a certain jurisdiction, a very specific jurisdiction that the government has in which we must submit to. Romans 13 specifically speaks about how the government is there to wield the sword. They're there to, as you said, to condone good. And there's even a warning there. Be afraid to do evil. Be afraid to do bad, because that's what the government is there to shield people from, in that sense. And that's the parameter, that's the jurisdiction that the government has in that regard. And that's something we should submit to. God did design the institution of government, and that's something that we must recognize. But once again, their jurisdiction is to condone good and to punish evil. But it's interesting because it doesn't say that the government defines what's good and evil, right? That's already been defined by God in His Word, and that's something we must recognize.
And that's the thing about this. Recently, I don't know, I think it was a month or two ago, Bowman Lusambo. I always forget what his name is. Lusambo.
Yeah.
He used Romans 13 at the time to justify the horrific things that he was doing.
Right.
It speaks to a suggestion or a worldview that says, yes, we are the arbiters of truth. Exactly.
Right.
The spheres of sovereignty, that's the government, the state, the state, the family, and the church, exist within the control of God.
Right.
He is above all, and he determines what those things are.
Absolutely.
And yet, it has become so easy for governments to suggest to their citizenry that they are the ones everyone should be looking at.
Exactly.
And that's it's so prevalent in our context. The government it does what it wants.
Sure.
And the consequences be damned, because who's going to say anything?
Exactly.
There's no grand narrative to govern how they're governing, so to speak.
That's exactly it.
And so,
I think something that something I've realized or thought of while you're saying that is that we have really struggled to figure out how do we speak the truth to the governing authority.
Sure.
Right. So there are some things that the governing authority cannot command you to do.
Yeah.
And the line is clearly set. The scriptures say if the governing authority, whether it's parents in the home, elders in the church, or the governing body, the government themselves, if they command you to sin against God, that's a line that we cannot cross.
Exactly.
Right. And so we do have that. We do know where the line is.
Sure.
Right? We know where the line is.
Yeah.
But the big question that tends to always come up is, in fact, people don't ask the question, and that's the wrong way of phrasing it.
Right.
How do we address these issues with the governing body? And the way I see it, I'll make the comparison to the family system. If you are in a home, right, where you have a non-Christian father or non-Christian mother, and they're commanding something of you, right, that they basically God has not given them that power. But they're not commanding you to sin, but God has not given them that power.
Right.
The discussion that needs to be had in a lot of circles is, we know God has said we should submit to these authorities, right? And so it is now the onus of the Christian, right, in this situation to respectfully, which sometimes we think
means just do it.
Stand in their face saying, "Mom, you do not have that." But that's not the way things should be. You respectfully, right, have that conversation, right, while submitting to the authority. So let me just give a bit of a practical example. Let's say in fact no. Let me stay clear on that. But basically, the response has to be you are still submitting to your parents' authority, and you're doing it graciously, right? With joy, because as we know, the demeanor is everything. If you are obeying in action only, but your heart is not, God isn't looking at that going
absolutely
obedience. And so
absolutely,
even while we are respecting and submitting to those authorities, we should be able to say, no,
exactly,
you do not have that power.
Exactly.
But what we tend to do is we tend to just, they are the government, right? And so we submit without telling them, this is not authority that you have been given.
Sure.
And so if we do one and not the other, if we submit but are not honest, God isn't happy with that.
Exactly.
If we are honest but we are not submitting, and that's where we tend to be as some Christians, we go, you don't have that power, and then we sort of leave out the submission.
In fact, that's a great point. But I think you guys have both touched on something that's very critical to understand, that I think very few people are, in fact, aware of. And that's simply the idea of the God-ordained three forms of government. So usually when we refer to the government, usually we only think of that being a reference to the state, right? But the three forms of government that God has ordained is the family, the church, and the state. And historically, these are idea. This is an idea that has been a contentious point. For example, many Catholic churches hold to the idea that the church is above the government or the civil magistrate, that everyone should submit to the Pope. In that sense, the second view is what's often referred to as the Erastian view, popularized by a guy named Thomas Erastus, which is basically the view that the state is above the church. This is actually the common view that we hear today, and perhaps popularized because we live in a statist world. We like this idea of big government and how it dictates everything to people. And of course, the third view is the classic Reformed view, right? And I say reform because it's very much a reformed view. And the position is that the various forms of government, which is the church, the state, and the family, are in a checks and balances relationship. In other words, none is higher than the other. Sometimes we like to see this sort of hierarchy where, if we even get that high up, God first, and then the state, and then the rest of us. When in fact, the classic reform view is God, and then horizontally on the same level, the same plane, you have the family, you have the state, and you have the church. None is higher than the other. But it's God who dictates how each of these spheres should function, and he also dictates how the spheres should relate to one another. And I think that's critical to understand that threefold idea of the government. So when we think government, we shouldn't just think, state. We should think family. We should think church. We should think state. And I like this definition from a man named Douglas Wilson. If you guys don't know, we love Doug Wilson, and he put it this way, and he said, the civil government is God's ministry of justice. The family is God's ministry of health, education, and welfare. And the church is God's ministry of word and sacrament. I'm going to repeat that one more time. The civil government is God's ministry of justice. The family is God's ministry of health, education, and welfare. And the church is God's ministry of word and sacrament. What do you guys think about that?
It's interesting how he puts it. In fact, it's interesting what you just said in terms of it's clearly a worldview issue that we're fighting with when we're talking about how you define the role of government. It's clearly a worldview issue because even in the horizontal illustration that you gave, where God is on top and each of these institutions exist horizontally. The problem with the world that we live in is we can't imagine. We can almost not even imagine how these exist horizontally unless you have a biblical foundation. Because people will immediately say, look, the family structure is patriarchal, and that's how it needs to be viewed. Sure. The state structure is authoritarian or totalitarian, and it exists like this with the citizenry in an oppressive relationship to the government. But the point here is to suggest the equality of them in relation to their hierarchy in creation, in how God has set things up. And so I really love how Doug puts it, because it's not a separation in hierarchy, it's a separation in role. It's a separation in responsibility. Right. The family has this set of responsibilities, the church has this set of responsibilities, and the state has this set of responsibilities, and it is sinful because of how God has set things up. It is sinful for one of those spheres to overreach into the sphere of responsibilities as the other. That's brilliant. So I really love the way.
That's brilliant.
And the separation is important because God's way is without a doubt better than the direction it will take. So just imagine for a moment that the family is in charge of justice, right? So now the father and mother are the ones who are deciding who gets what. If at all they are fallen human beings, which we all are, they might end up picking a favorite over anything, over one who is less favored, right? They'll pick on subjective standards, right? Exactly. But the state, right? I'm sure we've most of us have seen the imagery of Lady Justice. Lady Justice is blind, right? And so she is now able to determine justice without the favoritism, right? And then, in the exact same way, imagine if now we place the state in charge of word and sacrament. Come on,
exactly.
On. So the way God has laid things out is actually the best format that we can ever devise of ourselves. And so God in His wisdom has given us the way in which we should go about government. Right? And so the family needs to be conducted the way God says so for human flourishing to even be anything. Right? The state also needs to follow their own the moment these guys begin to overlap on one another, and even the church can try to overlap, where the church begins to determine, so you can't pay the government that much, or the excommunication now becomes banished. Like you are banished from society because you're excommunicated. No. God has placed the different spheres in there's a way in which they should relate to one another, and the moment they begin to overstep God ordained boundaries, bad things happen.
Absolutely.
And Christians should be the first ones standing up when we see such things happening to say, no, you should not do this. Because bad things happen when you go beyond where God says you should, or even when you begin to avoid the line or the marker that God has set.
Absolutely. I think that's brilliant. And just to kind of cap off this specific segment before we get into socialism, let's discuss this. Like, in light of what we've just discussed, what then can we conclude about what a government is not supposed to do?
That's a very good question. Well, in terms of our biblical framework to work with, obviously we've outlined condone good, punish evil. The government, I think we've touched a bit on it, but the government can't reach into the sphere of responsibility that, for instance, the family has.
Sure.
So the government can't come into your family and say you must run your family like so. Sure. That's not their responsibility. Sure. And that's actually what we're seeing. We're seeing more of that lately. I read a story recently about a family whose child believed was biologically a male, but believed that they were a female. And somehow this got out, and the government was willing to come into their home and tell that family that you must agree to this and allow for the child to undergo gender reassignment surgery.
That's ridiculous.
That's not the government's role. First of all, it's completely crazy.
It's bizarre.
Just generally. But the government has no responsibility to enter the home and say you can't, and it's because there is a standard. It's not just because, by the way, that it's not just because the gender reassignment surgery is a weird thing to want, but it's because that family unit as an institution submits itself to God, and God has a standard for all these things. If we take that out, if we take out the God-ordained responsibilities that these guys all have, then the government, which, by the way, has a lot more, especially nowadays, firepower, can then force everyone else to do anything it wants. Right? And that there's just a plethora of evidence, of historical evidence to show how bad that can get.
Sure.
And so it's a worldview issue. It's a foundational issue. We submit to a perfect being. And there are certain responsibilities that he gives these institutions.
Exactly.
And it's just like Monsa said, if we start blurring the lines between the responsibilities, quite frankly, hell breaks.
Precisely.
My example is an apocalyptic one. Right?
This will be interesting.
Let's say that cloning technology has reached a point where government can literally make humans. Right? They've harvested enough eggs and sperm, and they can make human beings. Right? If the technology reaches that point, we as the citizens, we as Christians need to say no. Right. Because government, that's not your role. It's not your role to make humans, even if you can. Right. It's simply not your role, right? And the inverse of that with government, another way in which like limitations are being set. If the government decides from now on you cannot homeschool, you cannot determine which schools your kids go to. You just do not have that power. You simply do not have that power.
So, with that said, would you say that government regulation on what children are supposed to learn should not be in their jurisdiction?
That's a very interesting one. The way I see it, because government is an administrative body, right? It is I would not have an issue. I don't even think there would be a problem with governments creating guidelines to say this is what we see as the optimum education for children, right?
Sure.
And they lay that out. These are the guidelines. But as I wrote something about this just this week, guidelines are not laws.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
I love that.
Once the guidelines are given, it is then on the people who are actually in charge of children's education, which is the parents, to say, is this worthwhile? Are we following this or are we not?
Sure.
And the way in which all of this is weeded out, which we will, without, as sure as day follows night, right? The way in which this will be proven is right now we have education curriculums that are they simply do not have any practical value to humanity. And so people are going to end up graduating based on state curriculum that there's no job. There's literally no job you can do because what the state said you should learn has got no real world value. And we'll probably get into this when we're talking about socialism. But nobody owes you a job. Exactly. Right? Your paper does not guarantee you a job. And so if government are commanding rather than just setting guidelines and principles, once they overstep in that realm, in that domain, they should be told. We should tell them in every forum that we can. You simply do not have this power. Bad things happen when you have this power, and we've got history to prove us right.
That's brilliant. All right. So we've just spent a little bit of time talking through what it is that government is supposed to do, and we've begun to speak about what a government is not allowed to do. And I just want to suggest a few more things in order for us to get into this next segment. And what I was going to say is the government is not responsible to make people wealthy or to redistribute wealth. The government is also not meant to own the means of production. That might be a controversial one, and we'll touch on that. And of course, we've already talked about how the government is not designed to govern over other institutions of government. And now, in line with this, I want us to talk a bit about socialism. And it is our common belief, we're not going to beat around the bush, that socialism is in fact not in keeping with God's intention for the state. But before we kind of get into the meat of this, I want us to address a question that usually catches people off guard. And the question is this: does the state have the ability to steal?
Well, I mean, the short answer is yes. Absolutely, they have the ability to steal. I mean, the state has the ability to be corrupt, and so there's definitely a perverted, the state is definitely capable of perverting its roles and responsibilities. So absolutely, it's capable of theft. I think one of the problems we have when talking about what the responsibility of the state is specificity. Yeah. Because somebody can come out and say, okay, I would make the argument that it is possible it is definitely possible for taxes to just be theft. There are certain things that obviously I think taxes go to which are beneficial and which are needed. Some ways in which I think that's misused definitely, but the question can be, okay, at what point exactly does it become theft? Yeah. What point exactly does the government overreach its bounds? Yeah. And it's a difficult question to answer all the time, but absolutely it can. The fact that government or government officials are human beings, is evident of the fact that they can steal. They can absolutely steal. And so just because the government says it is there for your good doesn't mean it's actually conforming and working towards that goal.
Right.
And we should never look at government as some kind of perfect institution that certainly it seems like Bowman thinks of himself as just this agent of the good of the people. You know, the historical record shows that governments have engaged time and time again in the most horrific of acts. And that can't be ignored. We can't just put that aside and suggest that no, now it's okay. It's not. So I suppose that's my sort of convoluted answer to the question.
Right.
The way I would put it is I'll start off by showing it in the family, because as we've said, family is a form of government in and of itself. If a father gives this mug to his son, is it theft for the father to show up a couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, a couple of years later, and take the mug away and give it to someone else? Yes.
Right.
Yes, because he gave the mug to his son, so the son is now the owner of that mug. Whether or not the father is giving it for altruistic reasons is irrelevant to the discussion. It's not his to give.
Right.
And so theft.
Exactly.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because we live in Zambia, Zambia has a very authoritative way of viewing male headship, and so. It is very much possible that somebody right now is hearing me saying this and going, no, the father does have the right to take whatever he wants and give it. The father has right of distribution. And we can have that discussion. I think they're wrong. We can have that discussion. Otherwise, as long as there's something there's a way in which goods and services are exchanged and government does not have the right to just decide. So seizing of private property.
And I think that's brilliant what you've just said, because that really is the point. I think people are really tripped up because they haven't really wrapped their minds around, first of all, the idea of the threefold division of government: the family, the church, and the state. And to take something from another sphere that was not given to your sphere is in fact stealing. That's the definition of stealing. And a lot of people like to think that the government, or the state specifically, is responsible for ruling the means of production and essentially own all property. Right? In fact, I'll give you an Oxford definition of socialism. And it says here, socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization that advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned and regulated by the community as a whole. That's how it's defined. Now it says here community, perhaps to sound less status. However, that community is gonna delegate a certain body to own and regulate the means of production. And I think that's where people really get tripped up on the question: can government steal? And I think they kind of tripped up all like, well, can they steal what belongs to them? Right? And that's really where they get tripped up.
Is that they own everything.
Exactly. If they own everything, then how can they really steal? But clearly, when we understand how God has ordained governments, right, the family, the church, and the state, we actually see that it is possible to steal. It is possible to take something that is in fact not yours. And I think the problem with socialism, for many reasons, is how it seems determined to steal not only the means of production, not only property, but also freedoms that are found in Christ, in God making us in His image. And that's...
just a quick note on that.
Go ahead.
About government theft. Something that's going on in Zambia right now. It's a recent sort of. It's a recent development. If you want to drill a borehole on your own land, you need the government to give you permission. I'll repeat that just so that we wrap our heads.
Say it a bit louder for the people in the back.
you buy land.
Yeah.
The land is yours. Proof that it's yours and you own the rights to that land is if you have a farm and gain produce from that land. The government does not own that. You don't need to ask the government for permission to farm on your own land.
Sure.
But the water that is found underneath your own land,
Yeah.
you need government permission to use that water. How?
Yeah.
It's interesting that it's even worse than what you say, because when you buy land in this country, you don't actually own the land.
Right. You lease it
You
for
lease it, you know. So
Yeah.
I've actually had a personal experience with something like this, where in Kafue, where the farm is, there's a portion of the land that we haven't developed. We had government knocking on our doors telling us, look, we're going to sell your land. They came to us and said, we're going to sell your land. You're not doing anything with it.
Yeah.
We're going to sell it.
Yeah.
They literally have the constitutional authority to just say, hey,
Yeah.
we've taken it back.
Repossessing.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, it's absolute crazy.
Repossess
There's
and redistribute.
There's no concept of actual private property. It's theirs, and they can do what they want with it.
Yeah.
And there goes the illusion that Zambia is not social.
Right? It makes no sense that people make that argument that
Right.
we're no.
And I think the argument is usually made, and we will get into this very specifically on African socialism. But it's interesting because people sometimes think, no, Zambia was socialist under Kenneth Kaunda, right? And since then, I mean, since Zambia received its democracy, we are now no longer socialist, as if democracy on its own was an antidote to socialism. And of course, this is probably said by people who don't really understand political ideology, and we will get into this, the idea of democratic socialism.
Or the myth.
Or the myth of the myth of it. But I've kind of already given a definition of socialism. Is there anything you'd add to that in any way?
Yeah, I think you said it right when you sort of critiqued the definition at the end, because that community part makes it sound as if we're just in a commune.
Everyone has a voice.
Exactly. We're just no, man.
Right.
No. It's so dangerous how some of these definitions are put together. I mean, I think a much more accurate definition would just be a market system where the government has control of the means of production.
Right.
That would be the truth, because the government will have the means of production.
Yeah.
It can do whatever it wants. It enforces its own morality. It enforces its own redistribution of wealth. And so on and so forth. I hope we get into Marxism. I'm itching to get into that.
In fact, that's the next thing we're going to talk about. Now, it's common knowledge, in research and history, if you actually read history, that Karl Marx framed the idea of socialism. Well, not directly. What he did was sort of attempt to create a sort of utopia. What he was trying to do was have an economic revolution where he was trying to change power structures in society, or seeming power structures in society, between the rich and the poor. So he saw the rich as being people who are oppressive and the poor as people who are oppressed. And basically what he was trying to create is a utopia where that gap is narrowed. And really, I think socialism has its root in Marxism.
I believe he coined the term, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was him.
Yeah, it could have been him that coined it. I mean, his friend, what's his friend's name again?
Engels.
Yes, Friedrich Engels. In a lot of ways, Engels was like, Marx is usually described as this lazy guy who used to sit on Engels' couch saying stuff. He was a lot more vocal than Engels, but Engels was, probably the brains behind a lot of this stuff as well. Marx was just a lot more vocal and a little more eloquent than his friend was. And so, Marxism is really the root of this. Now, it might interest you to know that there are many African leaders, and let me kind of give a bit of a historical context here. After several African countries were given their independence from colonialism, a lot of those countries went and established communist, socialist, same thing to me, communist states, right? It sort of as a retaliation to colonialism. They associated capitalism with colonialism. Therefore, capitalism is oppressive. And so they kind of went with the very opposite. And so some of them actually claim like, no, it's not that we've just come up with socialism now. Socialism actually agrees with our African worldview. We're communal, and we are humanists. And in light of that, we just happened to find friends across the ocean. And we actually like some of the ideas that they propose, which is why you had several African leaders at the time spending considerable amounts of time in the Soviet Union, which I find interesting. And I don't want to be long-winded here, but I just wanted to read a few quotes from some African leaders who were proponents of what became commonly known as African socialism. And this is from Kwame Nkrumah, who was a leader in Ghana. And he said this: socialism therefore can be and is the defense of the principles of communalism in a modern setting. It is a form of social organization that, guided by the principles underlying communalism, adopts procedures and measures made necessary by demographic and technological developments. Only under socialism can we reliably accumulate the capital we need for our development and also ensure that the gains of investment are applied for the general welfare. Socialism is not spontaneous. It does not arise of itself. It has abiding principles according to which the major means of production and distribution ought to be socialized if exploitation of the many by the few is to be prevented. If that is to say, egalitarianism in the economy is to be protected. Socialist countries in Africa may differ in this or that detail of their policies, but such differences themselves ought not to be arbitrary or subject to the vagaries of taste. They must be scientifically explained as necessities arising from the differences in the particular circumstances of the countries themselves. Before I get into something else, just what are your immediate thoughts on this?
I find it idiotic. The way people use science to back up a lot of these. Science has no values. And I cannot say this enough. Science has no values, right? I can put a bag of sugar and a bag of salt, right? Science can tell me what is. It tells me nothing
about what should be.
About motive and what it should be. Right? And so there's just, they love to use this whole science and reason, and it's so humanism,
right? And it's so shallow. It's unbelievably shallow, and I don't use that word to just provoke, but that's what it is. It never gets any lower than what is to what ought to any kind of foundation. Anyway, I feel like that might take us into it.
It simply cannot answer basic questions.
Exactly.
And they hide behind lengthy speeches and refuse to be asked certain questions.
Right.
The moment those questions are asked, there will be all sorts of words without any actual answer to questions. No honesty at all.
And
oppression of the many by the few.
Right.
What do you think government is?
Right. Exactly.
And the evidence, it's amazing how we just, like socialists, just ignore the evidential record in favor of their utopian ideology.
They think it's never been tried.
Dude, and you know what I find so interesting about that argument, because I hear it so much. It's just never been tried before. I find it interesting that what it seems to me like they mean is, look, if I was the one in charge of the socialist utopia, then I would have ushered in that utopia. Because I'm the good person. I understand. It's basically what they mean. If I was in charge, it's only the good that would have come out.
That's
and then
right.
we would have achieved the socialist utopia.
And I actually want to make a very bold claim that, it's interesting that a lot of African states went on to become communists or socialists. And my conclusion from that is that their interest was less in freedom and more in power. What they couldn't stand was white people ruling over them, right? They, honestly, I don't think as Africans we mind oppression. What we do mind
is oppression.
That's true. You know? That's very true.
Yeah. That's just the truth of the matter. A lot of people will find that scandalous to say, but that's absolutely the truth. Yeah. And it's interesting because I was reading a book. I'll provide a reference and link in the bio to this video, but it was written by a man who was, I think, a colonial soldier in Zambia, who many years after Zambia gained its independence came back to visit Zambia just to see how it was doing. And he was saying, look, colonialism was evil, but it's interesting that Zambia seemed to be doing better under a colonial government than they seem to be doing now. You know, I found that very, very interesting and very profound in that sense. And just kind of moving on from this a little bit, guys. What we are seeing is an increasing popularity of socialism in the West, right? Which honestly is just ridiculous. And they keep saying, you know, it's never been tried before. And we're over here being like, yo, over here, you know, over here. Why do you think this is becoming more of a popular idea in the West?
I don't know. I have so many thoughts about why that's happening. I think, in some sense, I think it's because of the legitimate past oppression that the West has inflicted on the world.
Right.
I do think there's an argument to be made that there are so many things that have happened in the past. You know, there are so many evils that have been done in the past. There's so many people who have been put down in the past. We need an overcorrection. I understand the argument. It's just a foolish argument. Sure. You know.
Yeah.
The problem, the solutions that are being proposed are, their basis is so convoluted and unnecessary. So, for example, some of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement have very proudly said, we are trained Marxists. It's amazing to me that you would say that with such pride. Marxist ideology, just in the last 100 years, has killed like 100 million people. We will ignore that, still speak about the oppression of the other people, the oppression of capitalism or free markets, but still believe that we have the moral high ground to say all these things.
In fact, World War I and World War II there were many reasons why those wars happened, but there were also very much ideological wars. And for much of the Western world, specifically the United States, perhaps the United Kingdom, it was about freedom, right? And freedom from the tyranny of communism, right? From the socialist, the National Socialist Party in Germany, and perhaps the Soviet. Of course, they kind of jumped ship at some point, but those ideologies were frowned upon greatly. America prided itself in being pro-freedom and pro-liberty from tyranny, and are now kind of going back to a worldview that they fought against for so long. You know? I
actually look at it differently. I don't think they're going back. I think they're moving forward in the wrong direction.
Interesting.
Because, you know, when we talk about the foundation of these things, I think it has a lot to do with a global progressive denial of a Christian worldview. I think we are more and more, the more we deny that, the more, you know, as Romans would put it, the more
we're given over to
to
a debased mind.
It's interesting to me that you can say there's a lot that can be said about the past. There's a lot that can be said about how Zambia has come to be the way it is. The colonialism and the oppression of our ancestors and the shipping off of people as slaves and the slavery that happened here. The question now becomes, because the problem that I see so often is people will continue to look back at those things as reasons for the bad things now.
Right.
But the question at some point has to become, okay, you are personally responsible for how you move forward in life. What are you going to do? If you keep looking back at what happened as the reason, are you just going to remain stagnant in the state that you're in? Or what things are you actually going to do? Now, that's a difficult... I think it's much easier to blame what happened, to blame other things, than to say, okay, I have to work. I have to make something of myself. That means that the responsibility now becomes on you. It now comes on you. And I think that is a biblical standard. God gave us the gift of work. Work is it can sometimes be unpleasant, but it is a biblical mandate that God has given us. But I think it's much easier to look at what happened in the past and say, look, you did all that to me. So you must give me things to make up for all those things that you did to me.
And that's the thing. Socialism really does pride itself or prey on this idea of victimology. Like, because I'm a victim, I'm now entitled and all these things.
Absolutely. My theory is it's slightly different from yours. I think it's salvation. I think it's virtue. At the end of the day, that when listening to the rhetoric of these of these things, I've heard a lot of political speeches in my brief time on planet Earth, and I can say without a doubt, we are getting to this point now where the political rhetoric is we are better than them.
Right.
We are better people than them, which is, and that's what socialism is preaching. It's virtue, right? These guys are doing this. We, because we are good people, are for the poor. We are for the oppressed, and so it's virtue. It is salvation. They think at the end of the day that is what is. So with a lot of them, if the question was put before them, if at all there was a God, and you were to stand before him after you died to give an account for your actions, would you say you were a good person? And a lot of them would say yes, because they think, because I was on the side of the oppressed, I was on the side of the poor, therefore I am a good person. And that's completely flawed, because we know, based on what the Bible has said, we know that good person, that's a category of one, right? There's only one person who ever fit into that thing, and it's the Lord Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
Right? And everything that we do is tainted by sin. There's an illustration that my brother used to give whenever we would go out for evangelism together, and the illustration is of a little girl who is she's playing in the mud outside her house, and her older brother washes his shirt ready for some event the following day. And so he washes his shirt and he leaves it up there on the line, and then he leaves the house. And then the little girl is there, she's playing in the mud, and then she sees it's about to rain. And so she stands up, tries to clean her hands on her clothes. She gets her brother's white shirt, right? Carries it as good as she can, right? So it's about to fall, she picks it up and she takes it into the house and she puts it down. When the brother comes home, she's first to run up to the brother and go, hey, I brought your shirt in. It would have gotten wet. I brought it in. And when the brother looks at the shirt, all he can see is the muddy hands on his white shirt. That's the virtue that these guys are preaching, because they think salvation is in their actions. But it's just not. It simply isn't. It will not cleanse. It does not give you a clean conscience. It does not make you a good person, because there's no such thing. And so the message of Christianity in all of this is not just that socialism and all these things are money related issues.
Yeah.
It does not save. You are not a good person because you think you're on the side of the oppressed.
Sure.
Yeah.
You are not. Salvation is only found in the Lord Jesus Christ. And at the end of the day, that's the issue that has to be addressed in even before going into the lengthy flaws of the socialist worldview.
Yeah.
That has to be said front center.
Yeah. So
that they know this is what you have to contend against.
Exactly.
This is my trump card.
Exactly.
Right? This is it. And this is what you have to contend with. Because at the end of the day, all your talk is for nothing.
Yep.
Yeah. Your talk doesn't make you a good person.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that will not save you. So I do think it's a salvation issue.
That's brilliant. So moving on a little bit, I just wanted to read something, which is basically a summary of what Kenneth Kaunda articulated in his humanism. It's really just 4 points he articulated. The first is this. That Africa had too few resources and was far too behind to be able to pursue development under a competitive free market capitalism. The second thing is that such an approach produced unequal distribution of wealth, which was not only undesirable for itself, but was also intolerable in societies where creating unity was an urgent priority and necessity. The third thing is development, and as a result of this, development should be more carefully planned and controlled so that resources would not be wasted. The waste might come from inefficiencies of competition, but also, if a small group of society got a disproportionate share of the wealth, they might waste it on consumption of imported luxuries. Fourth, it was widely accepted that development should be planned and controlled by the state. Also, only government ownership could provide the capital and other resources for large-scale enterprises. Thoughts, gentlemen? The first president of Zambia.
If you want to go.
I don't even know.
Here's the thing. Okay. I'll actually have us move on just a little bit, but with this in mind.
Okay.
All right? Long story short, this didn't work. Right?
It doesn't.
And the Zambian people definitely felt the oppression. You know, Zambia did get to the point where people are queuing up for bread. It got to a point where this guy just became a dictator. And interesting enough, not many Zambian people want to remember him as such. And perhaps because he was a freedom fighter. And credit to him for his freedom fighting and all that stuff. But these are his ideas. Long story short, people did get tired of it. They got tired of the tyranny. And eventually, they managed to get him out of power by introducing the idea of democracy. Long story short, here we are today in 2020. It's been you guys might have to help me with the dates, but it's been about 30 years since Kaunda lost power.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A bit more.
A bit more than 30 years.
Yeah.
Okay. But here we are again.
Less.
Oh, it's a bit less. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But we're in a dire situation all over again.
Yeah.
Perhaps suffering from the effects of this ideology still. So why didn't democracy work, seemingly?
Because democracy is not Jesus.
There's a
People feel like when you add democracy to the name of something,
all the problems
it's
solved.
saved.
Yeah.
Democratic socialism.
Right.
Boom.
Exactly. Exactly.
Democracy does it doesn't save.
Right.
It cannot save.
Yeah.
It really cannot save. All of these ideas, it's trying to save people from themselves.
Right.
It's basically saying we know how to use your money better than you.
Sure.
If we don't do what we need to do, people are going to take advantage of you.
Right.
Also, this assumption. Right now, it's more likely than it was before, but it's based on the assumption that a guy can run a multi-billion-dollar enterprise with 2 employees.
Sure.
Because that's the assumption, right?
Yeah.
Because he's keeping all the money to himself.
Yeah.
So he's got a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and he's just keeping the money between him and his friend.
Yeah.
And yet, what we know for a fact is that for you to run a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, you need all sorts of bits and pieces.
Exactly.
And if these bits and pieces are just, if they hate working there, if they're not putting in their best, you're not getting that multi-billion-dollar enterprise. But this takes it for granted, like, no, somehow it doesn't understand how production works.
Exactly.
In the immortal words of Elon Musk,
sure.
If people don't make stuff,
right,
there is no stuff.
Exactly. Right.
But
but also I think it's this idea that that democracy takes power from the people. Sorry, takes power from the state and gives it back to the people. I'm going to claim this. Socialism has never been opposed to democracy.
No.
I'd even say perhaps the difference between communism and socialism, it's a very thin line. In communism, you're forced to have to worship the government. In socialism, you get to choose which government you want to worship.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to say democratic socialism, you get to choose which government you want to worship.
I would say in communism, the difference between communism and socialism is who has the guns.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Pretty much just view them as the same thing.
Exactly.
I sort of view socialism as the economic wing of communism. But it's interesting. What you say is it's so true, man. Like we've sort of, especially in Africa, we've sort of deified democracy.
Yeah.
We've given democracy this elevation.
Yeah.
Like if the majority want this,
it
must be the good.
Yeah.
Sure.
It must be the good.
Democracy is Jesus.
Dude, and it's like any historical textbook will show you that just because a lot of people wanted the thing did not make it right.
Right.
A lot of people were engaged in slavery.
Sure.
Was it okay?
Yeah. Sure.
But it was democracy that allowed for that practice to happen.
Sure.
But
in fact, I think it's even democracy that established an institution that is now recognized as the state. If you remember the nation of Israel, where they wanted a king, and their reason was because the other lands, pagan lands, had a king, so we want one as well, right? And so basically, it's like, well, it's not me who wants it. It's in fact actually, I think it's Samuel who actually complained, like, God, do you hear this? They don't want you; they want a king, and God actually is like, no. Give them what they want, and of course, their first king was a tyrant.
Actually, I actually want to read 1 Samuel chapter 8. Let me start from. So this is again, the Israelites want a king, and God says, okay, let them have it. And this is Samuel's words to them from 1 Samuel chapter 8 verse 10. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. Verse 11, he said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you.
Yeah.
He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day. Dude, what more needs to be said? It's just
right
prophetic.
It's right there.
It's literally prophetic.
In fact, and if you notice, I mean, we could give an entire exposition on that. Basically what it says is that it's going to interfere with the sovereignty of the family. And also the sovereignty of the church. The idea of that tenth being given, tenth is associated with the idea of the tithe, right? basically the state is gonna destroy this. And essentially, the big problem is the people did not want God anymore.
Yeah.
Which is why I think your point is pretty profound when you say democracy doesn't work because democracy is not Jesus. And this is very sad because even in this country, next year is an election year in Zambia. It's interesting that people's disgruntlement is, with whatever issues are happening in the country, is often misdiagnosed. And even when it's accurately diagnosed, the solutions are really pathetic.
Yeah.
Their solutions aren't, well, okay, fine, then maybe we should actually catch on to the idea that a big government's not a good idea. Perhaps maybe we should start to create our own wealth.
Yeah.
Their solution is, yep, we need a new government.
Yeah.
Right? So much so that even the opposition leader, his big slogan and mantra is, we will fix it.
Yeah.
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 Guys, I don't want a government that's going to fix everything for me. I don't want a government that's going to do stuff. I want a government that's going to protect my freedoms to create my own wealth. Protect my freedoms to worship my God. I want freedom to educate my kid on my own and determine how I want to do that as well. A change of government is not what's going to save a society in that sense.
Yeah.
But clearly here the root issue is when you remove morality, when you remove God, what you have is a society that completely crumbles and breaks down.
Yeah.
And that prophecy right there will be repeated over and over and over again until people remember their God.
There's been a real life application, something like that. So a lot of governments do this right across the world. But over here, if you are in formal employment, part of your paycheck goes to the national pension scheme. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The government takes your money and says, we will save for you so that when you retire, we will give you back your money.
Yeah.
In a number of cases, people are not getting back their money, right? Because the government thought that they were the parents. Now, if somebody wants to have his pension scheme, fine, right? Let
that be an individual.
Yes, let that be an individual choice. Instead, it is taken away from. You are forced. And the thing that is happening more and more frequently now is rather than being given the lump sum when you retire, the government, as gracious as they are, they put you on an allowance. Yeah. Based on where you live, your lifestyle, they go, okay, so based on everything we've seen about you, this is how much we will give you of your money monthly. How nice, how gracious of
Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous.
And we really do need to speak about these issues in wherever we are, so that people realize the government is not God.
Right.
The government is not there to determine everything for you, to do everything for you. There is an element of personal responsibility where a man should look after his family. Right? Yeah. The family unit should be strong, caring for one another. The community should be strong.
Yeah.
If the individual is strong, the family is strong. If the family is strong, the community is strong.
Yeah.
But socialism basically puts it the other way around. If the government is strong, then you've got strength going down.
Exactly.
Which is it's impractical and it does not work.
Absolutely. And another aspect that I kind of want us to touch on, guys, is the idea of tax, specifically progressive tax. So whenever I've told people or just asserted that Zambia is in fact still a socialist country, people are usually like, no, not at all. Don't you see how much privatization has happened? Don't you see how many businesses are owned by individuals? And I'm like, okay, cool, but who still gets the bulk of your revenue at the end of the day? For example, income tax here is almost at 40%. Corporate tax, I think, is also extremely high. And you look at all those things, and you clearly see how the government may not be willing to run your business, but they're willing to take a lot of the benefit of off of that. Just what are your thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I'll start. I there's a sense in which I have mixed feelings about progressive tax. I'm not a fan of tax.
Yeah. Right.
But I understand at the very least, and this is what I was talking about in terms of specificity. How do we specify what is a reasonable amount for services like the fire department and
Sure.
the police, or do we find alternative ways to fund such institutions? The problem with governments, as especially in our country, but the problem with governments as we have come to know them is this is not a matter of discussion. We will just take, and a denial to take is you stealing your own money from the government, from the entitlement that the government feels.
Yeah.
So this question, I have mixed feelings only as far as how do we specify what is a reasonable amount to take, and and what is a reasonable amount of government institutions that can exist.
Sure.
Well,
I mean, I think one way this is sort of answered, I think in Romans 13 itself, there is actually a command to pay tax. But once again, it's in the context of what a government is supposed to do, right? To punish evil and to condone good. And so the degree to which we can actually help that happen, I think is a degree to which we should be able to determine what is a reasonable tax.
No,
so, for example, it's just as you said, for example, you look at a police department, for example, a military. Those are important, exactly, very important institutions. Once again, to protect freedoms, to punish evil and to condone good. How much needs to go into that? Perhaps it would actually be better if the government kind of drew up some sort of invoice and said, "Okay, guys,
I want to know where my money is."
Yeah, it's like exactly. This is how much it's gonna cost to provide these services, and based off that, we can then calculate what would be reasonable tax. See, now here's the problem: when you make government God, and they ultimately become your savior, they can ask for any amount. Right from you, and you'll just give it to them because it's like, oh yeah, we need this much to do this. We're doing you a favor, and that's why people have been exploited in their tax. I think even biblically, you can see that it's not even the government doesn't have the liberty to just make unreasonable demands on tax. There needs to be, once again, the way God has created things is a checks and balances system. Right? We should be able to have that kind of discussion with the government. Okay, what's a reasonable amount of tax? I go to a bit of a sidetrack, but I think it was pretty powerful. I'm trying to remember his name. It could have been John Speed, but I might be wrong. And I saw this well documented in I mean, it kind of went viral, but in the Babies Are Still Murdered Here documentary.
Great documentary.
Yes, where I think the state that he was in had legalized abortion or something like that, and as a symbol of mourning, he shut down his business for that day, and also said he was not gonna make any tax returns that would cover the amount of money they would have made on that specific day. And I thought that was powerful. Just him acknowledging, fine, I will give to Caesar what's his, but reasonably so. On a day that I have not made money, I am not going to pay you tax. I thought that was a great example of how it should be. So fellas, I think just closing up in the last few minutes, we've said a lot about socialism. I just want to close with this idea and just kind of get your thoughts on this. Why is this a moral issue for us?
Because socialism is evil.
Okay. Let's break that down.
The basis, the root problem is the basis of socialism. If you read, and I highly recommend everyone reads the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx had a very anti-biblical worldview, and it's at this point it's not possible to separate socialism from the ideas Marx was bringing up. People bring up places like Norway and things like that as socialist. The people in Norway themselves, I think the former prime minister himself denied, we're not a socialist country.
They run on a free market.
They do.
Yeah.
It's and every single socialist. Well, maybe let me say the socialist idea itself is predicated on this difference between what Marx called the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or the oppressors and the oppressed.
Yeah.
And this is the worldview to govern, interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
Are you the oppressor? Are you the oppressed? If you're the oppressed, if you're the oppressor, you must be brought down. If you're the oppressed, you must be brought up, so that you are at the same level. And it's in pursuit of outcome equality of outcome, goals. It's an anti-biblical worldview.
Yeah.
And that is why it is evil. It has, again, looking at the historical record of all the things that have happened in socialist states, where do we even start?
Yeah.
Where do we start? Do we start in with the treatment of the Jews? Do we start with the treatment of the Lenin regime, the Mao Zedong?
Yeah.
Take your pick. The effects are just too overwhelming for us to be like, you know what? Let's try that again.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to just ignore a plethora of evil in order for you to just say, let's do it again. But it seems like that's what so many people are willing to do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the way I see socialism is it is state mandated love. Yeah. So basically, the state forces you to love your neighbor by giving a lot of your money to the state, so that the state can love your neighbor.
Yeah.
Except if we look around, is the state loving my neighbor?
Yeah.
And so.
In fact, if you don't mind, I just want to read a story that pretty much captures what you're saying, and this is from a book titled "What If Jesus Had Never Been Born," written by D. James Kennedy and Jerry Newcomb, and there's a story that they tell here, and it says here: one Sunday when I preached on how the Bible does not teach socialism, a woman said to me afterward, "I completely disagree with you." "Wonderful. What do you disagree with?" She said, "I believe we are our brother's keeper." I said, "I completely agree with you. I believe we are too. The difference with you and me is I believe we are our brother's keeper, and you believe that the government is our brother's keeper."
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
That's it in a nutshell.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah. And it goes back to what we were talking about socialism being this false virtue.
Yeah.
And we really should get away from this notion. But something I have to make clear is I think socialism actually works.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think socialism works. I think socialism works within different spheres. Right? Within the home, socialism works. Walter Williams, the economist, the way he phrases it is he says communism. He says communism is fine as long as you can remember all the names. So in the home, he actually phrases it as, I'm an authoritarian in my home.
Yeah.
Right? I'm the one who sets the lines.
Yeah. Right.
Right? But that's because I'm able to keep track of all the names.
Right.
Yeah. But when it's stretched out, that's where things go wrong, because now you are placing way too much power in the hands of individuals, and there's almost no chance that they are going to keep things civil. And so what we end up with is a situation where the government looks like they are a good employer.
Yeah.
And so government is creating all these jobs. Government is creating jobs to justify all the money that they are taking. When in reality, if government are administrators, right, punishing evil and rewarding good, then there's no real reason why they should be that size.
Yeah.
And I'll just end this by giving an anecdote that just, for me, it shows the way in which we have completely lost track of how things should be. If Moose stole my car, he comes to my home, steals my car, drives it out of the gate, and just wrecks it, right? I have to get him arrested, right? We're going to go to court. Most likely he's going to be declared guilty.
Yeah.
He won't pay a single penny for the damages on my car.
Right. Yeah.
He won't.
Right.
Not a single penny for the damages. I have to repair my own car.
Sure.
Right? He's going to go to prison. Who pays for his upkeep?
You.
Are you serious?
Yep. Yep.
And that's what happens when we just leave all these things to like the state to figure out. You know, we end up with a really convoluted way of organizing society.
Exactly.
And that's because we have completely lost track of what personal responsibility should be.
Precisely.
In any other area,
Yeah.
when you damage something, you pay the damages. But no, when the state comes in, and Lord knows when this thing was brought in.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it has become the norm. Right?
Yeah.
If somebody murders my whole family, and the death penalty is like now that's not even in question. He goes to prison and I'm paying for it.
Exactly.
No punishment, no retribution. The state is not even doing its job in terms of punishing evil and rewarding good. And concerning this whole tax system, basically you discourage what you tax and you encourage what you subsidize. And what we have seen world over from the tax system that's being put in place achieving is punishable by taxes because of this whole progressive tax.
Exactly.
If I produce value for my neighbor, right, in the goods and services I provide, the government discourages me from doing that by taking it. And the worst one that I've heard, and it's coming from all these socialist millennials, is an inheritance tax. Are you
ridiculous.
An inheritance tax. So now even the motive of me working hard so I can leave something for my family will be gone.
Exactly.
Because the government has to take something.
Exactly.
Come on.
Yeah.
And
Ridiculous.
you are not virtuous in bringing these things forward. There's no virtue in that. It's completely convoluted. And we need to speak against it as often as we can because these ideas are dangerous and these ideas are here.
And just in closing, I just kind of want to wrap this up, just kind of packaging it in summary form. The reason why we're against socialism is because it really is an issue of morality. One, socialism is essentially the worship of the state, right? Which is a violation of the first commandment, right? And maybe expressed in the rest of the first 4 commandments. Socialism, it basically is a nice fancy way of permitting the government to steal. It's also an expression of covetousness, coveting what someone else has. And these are all violations of God's moral law expressed in the 10 Commandments. And that's why we reject it. That's why we absolutely reject it. But as you said, I think these are very important things to speak about. And of course, we couldn't talk about everything, but at least this should get people thinking and actually thinking what the Bible has to say about politics, about the government, about the state. And I pray that this will help us live more faithful lives as believers, and that people would also see their ultimate salvation in Jesus Christ and not the state. Anyway, thank you, gentlemen. With all that said, I'm Lennox.
And I'm Moose.
And I'm Mwanza.
And we are
Unapologetic.
Awesome.